Well, I'm always telling you about the bright and sunny days we have down here, but today is not one of them. So, but like my sister Paula always says, there are no bad sure days. I can still look outside, and between the dark clouds and the drops, I can see the beautiful ocean. So I'm happy. Well, I'm glad you're back again with me today. And it looks like people are really keeping up. I'm proud of you guys. And so we're going to do one of those snippets. So I'm going to try to keep it down. It really won't be much more than 15, 20 minutes if it goes past 20 minutes. And I'm going to go fast. Okay, so that I can brag to you and tell you you'll only spend 15, 20 minutes on the snippets. Okay, so we have we have two more sandwiches, and today is one, and next week will be the other, and then we'll go to other things. But I thought I'd give you the sandwich. And even for those who went through Mark with me years and years ago, it's always fun to redo them and recognize them and learn a little bit more, which I think I've done this time. I've learned a little bit more. So we start with Mark 6. It'll be from 6 to 30, from Mark 6, verses 6 to 30. And we have our sandwich. And because we might have some new people on here, because I'm hoping those of you who are my followers will send these little snippets to other people. They're a little bit easier than taking in a whole hour's worth of Bible study. So I think you might encourage your friends with these little snippets to hang in there and to follow the Hebrews Bible study. Okay, so we're starting with our sandwich, and remember what our sandwich is. It's 2 slices of bread with some lunch meat in between. And the first slice of bread will have a story, the beginning of a story, what you might call the first half of a story. And then there's an interruption. That's what we call the lunch meat, because that's the most important part of the whole sandwich, right? The lunch meat. So this part of the story is being highlighted. So there's a story, it stops, a new story intrudes, it gets finished, and the first story becomes the second slice of bread, and that completes the sandwich. It's the first half of the story finished. Got it? Okay, so many of you know the story of Jairus' daughter. Remember, the story begins with Jairus coming to Jesus. He wants Jesus to come and heal his daughter. And then there's an intrusion. And the intrusion is the woman with the hemorrhage. And her story is completed. And when her story is completed, the second slice of bread, the rest of Jairus' story, is given. So we all know that story. We'll see how a sandwich works. Jairus comes to him. That story is intruded by the woman with the hemorrhage. That story is concluded with the rest of the Jairus story. Okay, this is another one. And really, we have to begin. And if you want to, it's right there on your paper with Mark chapter 1, verse 2. And right away, we're given a prophecy about a messenger that's going to come before the Lord when the Lord comes. And the prophecy goes this way: as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way. Okay, so God's going to send a messenger. And who is that messenger? Well, in the book of Mark and Matthew and Luke and John, it's John the Baptist. He's going to be the one to come before the Lord, the Messiah. Now, John the Baptist is not going to only going to play a part in announcing Jesus. He's going to play a part in preparing the way. And you will see one of the jobs that he does in preparing the way of the Lord. So let's go with Mark. We have our first slice of bread, and it starts 6b. And he, that's Jesus, and Jesus is going to be in each of these sections. He'll be in the first slice of bread, he'll be in the sandwich, and he'll be in the second slice of bread. So take note of that. And he, Jesus, was going around the villages teaching. Now, I have to tell you something. All through the book of Mark, Jesus teaches and preaches. Those two words are different Greek words, but they're used interchangeably. So at times he says he's teaching, at times he says he's preaching. They just mean the same thing. And he called the 12, who are they? The apostles, and began to send them out in pairs and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. And he instructed them that they should take nothing for their journey except a mere staff. No bread, no bag, no money in their belt, but to wear sandals, and added, do not put on 2 tunics. In other words, they had to depend on the Lord for everything. It was almost like the children of Israel in the wilderness. Their sandals never wore out, nor their clothes. So we're having another Exodus, you might say. And he said to them, wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave town. Any place that does not receive you or listen to you as you go out from there, shake the dust off the soles of your feet for a testimony against them. They went out and preached. See, Jesus was teaching, they're preaching, either word. That men should repent. And they were casting out many demons, and were anointing with oil many sick people and healing them. Now, you may have noticed that in verses 6 and 7 are a lot like verses 12 and 13. But in verses 6 and 7, Jesus is sending them out. In verses 12 and 13, they're going out. But look what it says. He was teaching in verse 6. He sent them and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. Well, when they go out, they preach, and they were casting out many demons. So what he said to do, they're doing. But what's in between is extremely important, because it's how they're going to go out. They're going to take along with them nothing but what they have to have. And then it tells us, Jesus tells them what is to happen when they're being rejected. That they'll be accepted in many places, but they'll also be rejected. So that is the first slice of bread. He's preparing them for any antagonism that they may face. Jesus calls them. Now, I want to take a little bit of show you something else. So take your last page that has 2 columns. It has Mark 6, 6b to 7, and Mark 3, 13 to 15 on the other column. Do you see that? Well, if you notice, Mark 3, 13 to 15 is before Mark 6. Mark 6 is what you just read. But I want to take you back to Mark 3, because what Jesus had called the apostles to do, they're now going to do. So I want to show you how that the apostles' calling is being implemented in Mark 6. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause, and I want you to look at those 2 columns and find everything that's the same in both columns. Now remember, the second column comes first in chronological order. it's why the apostles are being called. And then the first column is what we just read. So just put it on pause and then come back. Okay, so did you circle and use your color pencils or whatever else you want to use, whether it's a pen or a pencil? Doesn't matter, just as long as you circled all the things that were common in both columns. So if you did, you notice in verse 7, Mark 6, Jesus calls the 12. In Mark 3, it tells us that he went up to a mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him, and he appointed 12. In the first column, he sends them out. He sends them out. And in the second column, to the right, in verse 14, it says he might send them out. In the first column, it tells us that they would have authority over the unclean spirits, and also tells us when they were out doing what Jesus told them to do, they were casting out many demons. And in the second column, Mark 3, they would be given authority to cast out demons when he's given. It calls the 12 the first time. Okay, and then he sent them out to preach, and they go out to teach, right? Or preach in the first column, verse 12. So what he originally called them to do is now being implemented in chapter 6. So this is the main job description of these apostles. And it's neat because the word apostle comes from the word sent in the Greek. So they are the sent ones. The apostles are the sent ones because that's what apostles mean. The word sent is a verb. The word apostles is the noun form of the word sent. Okay, so let's look at the lunch meat. And this time, I want you to circle the word here. And there's a reason for it, and we'll come back to that. And King Herod heard of it. So you'd circle heard. For his name had become well known, and the people were saying, John the Baptist has risen from the dead, and that is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others were saying he is Elijah, and others were saying he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he kept saying, John, whom I beheaded, has risen. Now, the fact that John was beheaded has not been told to us before this chapter. So now the author is going to go backwards in time and tell us the story of when John is beheaded. For Herod himself had sent and had John arrested and bound in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. I want to stop right here. John never goes to Pilate to tell Pilate that he has broken the laws, which he has done. He never cries out against the Caesar. He never cries out against any of the other leaders of Palestine at that time. Only Herod. So why Herod? Because Herod was half or partially Jewish, and he was claiming that he followed the laws of the Jewish religion. He was even the builder, one of the builders of the temple. He followed the laws of the Jews, and here he was married a woman who was really married to Herod's brother. So he was breaking the law, the Torah, yet claiming to be a Jew and a follower of the Jewish tradition. So that's the reason why John had the authority from God to call out against Herod. Herod was claiming to follow the law of the Jews and claiming to be part Jew himself, which he was. Part Jew anyway. Okay, so John doesn't cry out against the Gentiles who are doing wrong things. He's crying out against someone who claims to be a believer. Okay, but when for Herod himself had sent, in verse 17, let's read that again. For Herod himself had sent, remember, Jesus sent, now Herod's sending, and had John arrested and bound in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, because he had married her. So, for John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife while he's still alive. Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death and could not do so, for Herod was afraid of John, knowing that John was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. When he heard him, John, he was very perplexed, but he used to enjoy hearing him. Are you circling those two? Heard, hearing? Good. A strategic day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his lords and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. And when the daughter of Herodias herself came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. And he swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give it to you, up to half my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. Straightway or immediately she came in a hurry to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And although the king was very sorry, yet because of his oath and because of his dinner guests, he was unwilling to refuse her. Immediately or straightway the king sent an executioner and commanded him to bring back his head. And he went and had him beheaded in the prison, and brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about this, they came and took away his body, and laid it in a tomb. Okay? So you saw the word heard as it applies to Herod 4 times. Now, others, the disciples are going to hear also, and that's important. But I want you to take note that 4 times Herod is said to have heard. Okay? So I want to tell you why that word is so important in the whole book of Mark. It's because whenever a story is told of someone who comes to Jesus, they either hear Jesus or about Jesus, or they see Jesus. Those 2 words, hearing and seeing, are in almost every story in the book of Mark. They first hear or see, and then there's a response to that hearing or seeing. Let me give you a couple of examples. Go to Mark chapter 5, because what I want you to do is what my sister Betty is doing. Next time she's reading through Mark, she's going to be watching for seeing and hearing in every story, because I told her about this just like I'm telling you. So the first one of the ones I want you to see is in chapter 5, verse 2. Jesus is going on a boat. He's going to the Gentile side of Galilee, and the country of the Gerasenes, we're going to see that he meets upon a demoniac. So let's see what it says in chapter 5, verse 2. When Jesus got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And then in verse 6, it says this: seeing Jesus from a distance, this man, ran up and bowed down before him. Okay, so he sees Jesus from a distance, right? And he runs up to him, and then in the end, he believes in Jesus, doesn't he? Okay, in another one is in 5:22. 5:22. And this time he's in the boat again, and he stays by the shore. And it says in verse 22, one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and on seeing him, fell at his feet. So Jairus sees him, the demoniac sees him. Both of them kind of bow down, and in the end respond to him in faith. Chapter 6, 53. And it says this: when Jesus crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. He's crossing the Sea of Galilee back and forth. That's another theme that goes through the book. And moored at the shore. And when he got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him and ran about the whole country and began to carry here and there on their pallets those who were sick to the place they heard he was. They're hearing. And they were being cured. 7, 25, and 26. This is the last one, but I want you to see this. In verse 25, here's the Syro-Phoenician woman, the Gentile woman whose daughter has a demon. So in verse 25 it says that, but after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syro-Phoenician race. She hears, she's going to believe her daughter will be healed. So now that's just 1, 2, 3, 4 verses, and now the fifth one is the one about Herod. He hears, but he does not respond in faith, does he? He responds really in unbelief. Okay, so now let's get, so we saw that. Let's see. The second slice of bread. Oh, I did want to show you this. The contrast between Herod and his hearing and the hearing of the disciples of John the Baptist. Herod heard and had John beheaded. John's disciples heard, came, and took away John's body. There's a contrast there, isn't there? One is the response of doing the wrong thing. The other is a response of doing the right thing. Notice that John's disciples, despite the fears that they might have had, come to him, take his body, and lay it in a tomb. Does that contrast with anybody you know, you've heard of? Yes, Jesus' own disciples. Only one fearful disciple has, and he's not even one of the apostles. He's a scared religious leader, and he goes and collects the body and buries it, doesn't he? whereas John's disciples come immediately when they hear and they take him away. Okay, so let's go back to the second slice of bread. It's like the first slice, only now they're returning. And the apostles, now remember, they're the ones that are sent, and apostles mean sent ones. The sent ones gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. So, in the first slice of bread, Jesus is sending them out. And he tells them what to do. In the second slice, they return. These sent ones return, and they report to Jesus all that they did and taught, which is what Jesus told them to do. He told them that they could have authority over the demons. He told he told them that they were to teach and preach, and they have done that. And now they're returning. So why is the story of them being sent and coming back surrounding the story of what Herod does? What in the world? In fact, when a long while ago, decades ago, when these sandwiches were first found, one theologian who saw it said, but there's no connection between the one story and the other. Of course there is a connection. You just had to use a little bit more ingenuity. And the thing is, there is a connection because you have disciples who go and do exactly what John has done. He has preached. He has taught. And what happened to him? He ended up getting beheaded. Now the disciples are sent out to preach like John did. What might happen to them? Death. So the disciples, through the picture of John, are being shown, and we are being shown what might happen to a disciple who follows Jesus. There might be death. Now, I've been thinking on this for years. I'm probably never going to have to face that kind of thing. So they were disciples to the death. What I've been called to do and what you've been called to do is to be disciples to the life. What do I mean by that? It means I might have to face a lot of other yucky, horrible things that Satan's going to throw at me. Am I going to live through it in Christ? Am I going to live for Christ? We're never going to have to give probably the ultimate sacrifice, but can we sacrifice through our lives by trusting God through everything that might happen to us? Yeah, we're facing this today. Are you going to trust Jesus with this, with your fears concerning the virus? Are you going to trust Jesus with your fears concerning the fact that you might be losing your job, or that the economy may go into a deep, dark depression? Are you going to trust Jesus through those things? Because we're being called to live for Christ, even through these hard times. We need to choose to trust Christ no matter what, because we're going to have Christ walking with us through it, whatever may happen. John the Baptist did it to the death. Jesus' followers lived for him to the death. Are we going to live for him through the circumstances of our lives, no matter how horrendous? Can you do that? Why don't you go to the Lord today and give him that? I'm not going to worry anymore, Lord, because I'm going to just trust you today. Anyway, let's get back to what's going on. The first slice of bread. The first slice of bread tells us this. Jesus is sending his apostles. They're going to face hard times when they go out. They may even have to brush the dust of their feet off as they leave a town that has rejected them. They return. They are disciples. They are sent ones. They are apostles. They are the 12. And then in the middle, a man who's going to put a disciple of Christ, John the Baptist, to death. And so John becomes, in more ways than one, the forerunner of the Messiah. Remember we read that? As it's written, behold, I send my messenger. It's John the Baptist ahead of you, who will prepare your way. And so that is Jesus, whose way is being prepared by John the Baptist. And how did John the Baptist do this the best? By dying. And Jesus would follow. And we're to be willing to follow Jesus to the death or to the life. Now watch this. Both Jesus and John the Baptist are arrested. Both are handed over. Both are bound. Both are killed. Both have their bodies taken away, and both are laid in a tomb by disciples. See, John the Baptist was the forerunner. Jesus followed John in all this. John preached and was rejected and killed. Jesus preached, would be rejected, and would be killed. What happens to John and Jesus is a picture for the disciples of what will happen to them too. That's how they're tied together. I hope you enjoyed this sandwich. Now let's see. Oh my goodness, I took 32 minutes. I'm so sorry. Next time, I hope to do less time. But I love you, and I love his word, and I wanted you to see it. Okay, dear. Bye-bye.